Welcome back to a brand new season of Rip It Up. Every renovation teaches you something, but it's only after you've lived through the dust, the delays and the decisions, and then done it again like me, that the real lessons appear. This season, we're revisiting our biggest renovation topics, not with theory, not with optimism, but with hindsight. Process, planning, lighting, kitchens, bathroom, windows, what worked, what didn't, and what we'd never do the same way again. This is What We Wish We Knew Then.
Welcome back to the podcast. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Jen.
Episode 2 of our new series where we dive back in and go through all our top tips for renovation and the process as we do it from start to finish. So we're talking about planning permission. It's a minefield.
I have a few things to say on this. It took me a long time this time.
I mean, this episode is going to be useful to listen to because we're going to give you tips and we're going to give you, the best guidelines that exist out there. But I have to say, there just does not seem to be much rhyme or reason to planning permission. It seems to be who you get in the office, what kind of day they're having, where you are in the country, and
whether your local councillor sends a letter for you.
So, I don't know.
It's so annoying.
Look, there's obviously some great people out there in local planning offices who are doing their absolute best to, preserve buildings and structures and neighbourhoods and environments and all that kind of stuff. And I don't they're fantastic. We love them. There's a few others out there that I have thoughts on.
I have bit of a beef with. I have a bone to pick or two, yeah. And we should say from the outset, this is about renovation planning permissions, renovations, extensions, and in my case a couple of protected structure ones as well, which is a whole different ball game as well. But maybe we might give some advice as to maybe some stories about our planning permissions that we've been through and what we've observed through that, and maybe what we do different each time, although then it could have a different outcome every time, so you wouldn't know that either. But let's talk about how we did it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you'll pick up a few nuggets. All right. So when do you need planning permission? How do you know that you have to go for planning permission? I mean, first of all, if you're doing a big extension or renovation, your architect will tell you. But the rules are, if you're doing a big, large addition to the house, so over 40 square meters is what's classified as large. If you're changing the use of the house, if it is materially altering the exterior of the house. Especially to the front, right? Especially to the front. They don't seem to be as fussy about what happens in the back of the house, but the front of the house is really important. And if it's in any kind of protected or sensitive area, or if it's a protected structure itself.
Protected structures essentially need planning for everything, even the internals, which is a bit bonkers, but you can't just go knocking down original walls inside a protected structure either. That actually requires a different planning permission application, even though you might not be doing an extension. So it's just a watch out. If you're ever looking for houses and you see their protected structures, check them on the record of protected structures list on the council websites before you buy a house, and just know what you're getting yourself in for.
Yeah. You're in for a lot of work, I'll just tell you that from the outset. It's still worth doing, but I do find it frustrating, and I get why buildings that are special and important to our heritage and all that should be protected. It's frustrating that it's so hard to change certain things about buildings that I don't feel necessarily need to be protected, or at least the elements that they don't allow changing need to be protected. But anyway,
so stepping through the basic stages, we'll say, of planning, we might just do a bit of a helicopter tour of the different stages, and then we might go back and talk about each stage and what our experiences were. Yeah. So there's a pre-planning stage, when you've done your plans, and you can actually have a pre-planning meeting with the council if you want. In my experience, a lot of people don't tend to do that because they can still ask you for information even if you've done their pre-planning meeting. A lot of people tend to do that maybe for complete new builds, but for renovations and extensions, less common, I would say. Yeah. And then obviously you got to prepare the documents for submission with your architect or your architectural technician or her designer, whoever's, doing that. And before you even put the application in, the submission clock starts ticking. We'll say you have to put a notice up on your house, on your gate, usually if you have a side gate and a front gate, or front and back or something, and published in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And then it's lodged 2 weeks after that, and then that's day 0.
I think it has to be a national newspaper, so like the Independent or the Times or the Sun or the Irish Daily Star or one of those. Yeah.
Then they kind of validate all the docs you uploaded. That usually happens
Yeah.
pretty quick. In my experience, it was a couple of days. It's kind of usually less than a week, but it'll say, yeah, everything is there. Tick, 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 tick. Let's go into the observation period. And here is the 5 weeks where your
This is a white knuckle,
or
right?
whoever,
This 5 weeks
or
is-
Jim Bob down the country who has no valid reason for being able to, you know, consult on your documents.
Why is
can
this
put in an
allowed? Why
observation.
is that allowed?
I don't know.
It drives me
And I
bananas.
actually saw 2 elderly gentlemen in my local coffee shop one time perusing planning permissions that had been submitted that week in the area. Like, just might fine if it's your next door neighbour or, you know, but this kind of thing that we have an opinion on anyone's house or anyone's extension is bonkers, unless you have
Yeah.
a material interest or whatever. But anyway, that 5 weeks is kind of where people can put in I wouldn't call it an objection at this point, but an observation or a submission or something.
Yeah.
I've had observations on mine. How did you
Mm-hmm.
kind of approach yours?
I had none. So the back of my house is not overlooking anyone. So the type of work that I was doing wasn't going to really impact on anyone. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody might not submit an observation on yours. People can submit an observation for anything. Tends to just hold up the process. But I didn't. And then I also, my house is terrace cottage. And I called into the neighbours on either side. One was a lovely elderly woman who has since passed away, and she didn't give a ding dong. She just said, do whatever you want. I don't care. Best of luck to you. And then the others, actually that house had just been sold and the new owner hadn't moved in yet. So the ones that were moving out obviously didn't care. And they said, go for it. So I got really lucky. It absolutely sailed through. It helped. I think, you know, there's no harm calling into your neighbours and just giving them a heads up, but it certainly doesn't prevent anything. I mean, we have a story of a good friend of ours who was really nice to her next door neighbour, was putting in an application for an extension that neighbour had already done himself. Like, he had extended out that fire and, you know, had plenty of meetings with them where their feedback was listened to, their thoughts were listened to, their concerns were listened to, the architect met him, all that kind of stuff. And he still put in an observation on the very last day of planning permission, which is one of the rudest things I've ever heard. It's like a young family, 3 young kids, like trying to just get a house to livable standards.
So I'm in
and it
two
was
minds
upheld,
here
so it was really
about the
frustrating.
whole reaching out to your neighbours thing. It really depends. It's a case by case basis here. If you think it's going to be of value or you think it's going to be something that starts an argument before the process begins, which means they'll definitely submit something then. So like our first one in Dublin that was a protected structure, we went to a neighbour on one side who we shared a boundary wall with, which we knew we were going to be interrupting. We didn't go on the other side, even though there was a window to the rear. It wasn't overlooking their garden because it was they were to the left of us. But we kind of didn't think that it was going to materially affect them. And honestly, I didn't really know them that well. I kind of said hi, whatever, when we'd be going in and out of the house, but I didn't know them well or by name or whatever. So anyway, they objected on the last day of the 5 weeks as well, or one of the last days. Anyway, we were like, no objections, no, observations the whole time, clock ticking, like last day or something. And I think her letter
Guys, if you're
was
listening
actually...
and you're planning to object or observe, like, don't do it on the last day. You're really messing up someone's life. You're causing them a lot of expense. Just don't do that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
so then you have an opportunity, I suppose, to come back on that, and like whether you change the plans or you just say no, I want to keep the plans as is. Let the planner decide. We decided at that time not to. We just took away the window that was an issue for her. So we just took that away and resubmit. But there's still a resubmission and there's a bit of time in that, and then it goes back to the planner for I guess their decision. We did it differently this time in that again we had a kind of a shared party wall. We kind of knew the neighbours, they were sound, we were talking to each other a bit. And I said, look, we're going to be doing this wall. The original wall was pretty disgusting and old. So we kind of came to a win-win situation where we said we'd make the wall nicer and we'll, finish it on your side however you like. And so sometimes you can come to those kind of mutually beneficial agreements as well if you have a good relationship. But if you don't have that relationship going into planning, you might be, teasing the bull here. I don't know. I judge it on your own cases, but it's not always the best solution to talk to your neighbours.
Some people are just unreasonable and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's really frustrating. Do you know when you resubmit, so when you change the plans and took the window out, that doesn't reset the timeline, does it? You don't have to do a whole other 6 weeks?
No, it's only because like the time, I suppose the 5 weeks still has to lapse, right? So everyone kind of, we were essentially putting it back to what it was anyway. So they couldn't really object on that case, I guess. But the planner could come back and ask for more information down the line as well when their decision comes a few weeks after that. And they didn't in our last one. Once we kind of adjusted and put it through, the planner said, yeah, fine. And then this time, holy moly majoli, they came back with a request for a serious amount of information. It's usually like a lettered list.
They just did not want your house to be touched at all. They just wanted to be left as kind of a...
yeah, there was a lettered list and we got to letter O, I think. Yeah. And that was all like, I mean, that's not just like one little liner answers. These are like drawings, you know, like specifications, everything. So we had like, you know, what's the letter O in the alphabet? 10 or 12? Is it? Like we had that many individual documents to update and upload and whatever, you know, so it was a lot, and it took our architect months to pull all that additional information
and
together.
And you had to pay for that.
And then resubmit. So that was all delays, right? It was all delays on our end, but it was also cost of time for the architect or whatever as well. So that request for information, would it have been better if we did a pre-planning meeting? I don't know. I think they could have come back with similar questions, and I don't know if they would have gotten into that nitty-gritty detail they did in the request for information in a pre-planning meeting anyway. So that was a hard lesson. You were just unlucky. I don't know how I do it different.
On the wrong day, and you and your two little kids had to stay in a freezing cold house for weeks longer, months longer, and pay a lot of money. And it's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, it is really frustrating. But that further information stage can really throw you, you know, like, so the planner can kind of come back with a request for information by week 6, 8. And then like the further information stage can take months. Like it took us 3 more months, you know, and then after you submitted that further information, they have another month to respond, you know, so like that stack is a lot, you know, and there's very little you can be doing in parallel, especially with a protected structure, which they essentially don't want you to touch anything in. So like thankfully like, you know, we're like a little bit handy in that some of the restoration stuff that we weren't altering the building, we could kind of get a head start on, but still it's a lot of stack of time like to be thinking and planning. And then that appeal stage, I've never gone through this, but that could take you another year if you want to go through.
Yeah, that could take a year.
And all you know,
a year, so and a lot of cost, you know.
Yeah. So that was my kind of learnings over the few houses.
Yeah. The thing as well that's really frustrating about that stage is that, you know, that's the point when you do need to be lining up your builder, your contractors. That's the point where you probably need to be looking for a rental to move into, which we all know is next to impossible. That's a whole other full-time job in and of itself. So it's a difficult, frustrating time, and we can't give you much advice to get through it other than to be prepared to maybe live in the house that you're in for longer than you think you need to, and just know that these delays are you know, possible. Yeah.
And we should also say you can't just start works then. There has to be a commencement notice. So like when you get your planning permission in hand, you can't just go and knock a wall that day. You have to lodge a commencement notice to say you're starting works at least 14 days before the works start as well. So like they're I know they're all little weeks or whatever, but like God, they stack, you know, they really stack.
It's the difference between getting in, you know, before winter time or into a new year, you know, it does really all add up. And then obviously again, delays can push out when your contractor, when your team can start, all that. So it's a lot.
So they were my kind of like learnings, I suppose, from a conservation point of view. But one of the biggest learnings I've had in this house especially, I think they were a little more lenient in the last house. And when you talk about like some of the things in conservation that make little sense, like, look, my background is kind of in sustainability, so it kind of breaks my heart, some of the stuff that you're not allowed to do in these old houses. And you're so focused on
restoration, like you're so sensitive, like to just maintaining the originality of homes. Like it's just, I don't know anyone else who's as into it as you are, do you know?
while I love these old homes and I believe they should be conserved and preserved and whatever, I don't think they're museums. And I think more recently they're being treated as such. And I think if the councils want museums, they should buy a house in each of those areas rather than putting these kind of requirements on the owners and then not really giving a lot of grants to do it. There's some grants, but the majority of them are given to fucking churches or something, you know, like, so there's very little of those grants getting through to homeowners, and they expect you not to insulate the houses, not to change single glazed windows, you know, like all these kind of things. So your bills are through the roof. Like, so our last house, they actually
and it's inefficient. It's unsustainable. It means
totally
that you're using more energy to heat the house because the heat is just going out the single glazing windows. You know, it doesn't make sense.
Like our front window, the bay window in the front of our house in the living room, is 4-panel bay window, and it's all sashes and it's all single glazed, right? So we were told not to touch that. Yeah, we didn't apply to do anything anyway. We just got it restored. We got a brush strip like they all recommend you do in conservation. That window is freezing. Like, so I have heavy kind of curtains, thermal lined curtains that you have to draw, and then it's kind of okay. But still, that room is, you know, degrees colder than the rest of the house. You know, it's really hard to sit in that bay window. Yeah.
And I understand the requirement maybe not to rip out that window and replace it with some, you know, PVC monstrosity that just completely changes the aesthetic of the house. But that's not the case these days. It is possible to just change out the window and to replace it with something that looks the exact same and does maintain the character and the aesthetic and the originality of the home. So I don't get it.
I know some people argue that the old glass, the old wobbly glass, is kind of what they love. That's beautiful, but is it worth, you know, hundreds, if not thousands more in your heating bills every year?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd argue.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And the internal stuff you mentioned earlier as well, that you weren't allowed to do internal joinery even around a chimney breast, which actually wasn't even the original chimney breast. Like, some of that is just crazy. Anyway, we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole in this one. Some stuff that helps, just with guidelines, right? I think rules of thumb, because again, the planners can come back with anything or people can object to anything, is a few things. One is, I think it's always helpful to look at what your neighbours have done, what other people have done, because if there's precedent for the work, then it's more likely to pass and it's harder to object to, and it's, you know, more likely to be successful if you appeal it. There's a few rules and guidelines that we mentioned earlier around how much you can extend. One is that if you're adding an upstairs window, it needs to be 11 metres from your boundary wall. That's not in every single scenario, because I, for example, don't have 11 metres to my external boundary wall. But, you know, as a general guideline, as a rule of thumb, that is kind of symptomatic of the fact that privacy is taken very seriously in urban environments. So if you've something in your plans that are likely to infringe on the privacy of your neighbours, that's where you're likely to run into the most trouble.
But if you had someone behind you 11 metres, within 11 metres, they would have maybe rejected your back window?
Potentially, potentially.
Yeah. So like, this is the bit, it's like where it gets a bit grey areas. If you're overlooking people, can you obscure the glass? Can you fix the window? Can you put the window high so you're not overlooking? So like, all these things have to be, I guess, considered in terms of like how far you are from your boundary or your neighbour's boundary or whatever.
Yeah.
But windows and overlooking are tricky, as is light. But I don't think anyone has a right to light.
No.
But they don't want you to put a monstrosity in your garden where you're left with kind of nothing to the boundaries and no green area. You have to leave out a certain percentage of green area or permeable ground or something, which can be gravel or something as well, but some sort of like level outdoor space.
That makes sense.
Which is fine, I think we should have that for sure. But it gets a little bit grey there, and that's where maybe you think about talking to neighbours or not, but like, or you just see if it sails through and say nothing. But the point about like the windows and insulation and the kind of old chimney breasts, it's not to kind of just go down the rabbit hole of conservation, but it's a learning that I've found for these kind of houses and planning is they want the original integrity and structure of the building to remain. And where we put on an extension to the original structure, you had to mark that point where the old building meets the new building, so they don't want you to erase history. So like, if you can prove in your plans, that's my kind of learning from all this, if you can prove in your plans that you can almost put the house back to what it was, you haven't disturbed that original structure, then I think they're fine you doing it.
Yeah.
Besides insulation, they don't seem to like insulating these old houses, which is annoying.
Strange. Yeah.
They'll tell you it's for damp, but like there's loads of breathable insulations and all that. But like anyway, that's a whole other kind of technical episode, I think.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting to note as well is that we mentioned if you don't add stuff to the front of the house, it's easier to get through. That applies to solar panels as well. I think solar panels are now exempt from planning permission. They definitely are in the back of the house. I think there was at least a movement, and if that's passed, I'm not sure, to exempt them from the front as well. And I think things like Velux windows, if they're in the back of the house, you typically don't need planning permission for things like that. Like they're kind of small, they don't infringe on privacy, they don't materially change the structure. So,
except in conservation, they do.
Except in conservation, they do.
Once
sure.
you touch any of the roof structure, because we had to put in a Velux in our bathroom, which we had to apply for planning, and you have to put in a special conservation Velux, even though it's not visible from the road.
Like looking for a house that is listed, I mean, you're adding, I don't know how many tens of thousands to your renovation
bill on timeline. Yeah,
but it's worth it, because now you do have a beautiful old house that
costs an absolute fortune to heat sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, certain rooms are fine, and certain rooms cost a fortune to heat. I just close those doors sometimes.
Okay, so timeline wise, right? If you get that request for further information, obviously that can take a lot of time, and you're back and forth then between whether like they accept the information that you give them back. You've got about 6 months for that. Then they have to assess that within 4 weeks, and you could be over and back on that. As we said, it could be a year. If they don't request further information, then they need to give you a planning decision within 8 weeks of your application. So that's if you sail through planning with no issues, no observations, no further information, nothing, then you could have your decision within 8 weeks of your application. So that's a best case scenario. That's worth noting. If they requested further information, they've got 4 weeks after your response to get back to you. Same for an appeal. And then,
so you're quickly stacking up the months there. I'd say absolute sail through, you could be as low as 3 months. If they ask for further information, depending on the amount of further information, you could be adding 1 month, 2 months, maybe even 3 months, like in the case that I had 15 line items to address. Yeah. And then if you're going for appeals, you're over the year. That's the way I'd see it anyway.
The other thing that's useful to know is that you typically, once your planning permission has been granted, it can expire. So it typically lasts for about 5 years. And that can be helpful if you're looking for houses and you see one that has planning permission, just double check when was that granted and when does it expire. Because that's really important as well. So overall,
that's a good point actually on the planning permission lapsing in the 5 years. It's the reason sometimes people put stuff in their planning permission application but don't maybe do it in the first tranche of work. And they say, oh, I'm putting in for an attic conversion as well, but I'm not going to do it right now. You still have the couple of years to go back and do it. So you don't have to do everything in the planning straight away, which is a good point to note. So get in where you have to.
Do as much as you can in that first. Once it's through, it's easier. So that's really it. Those are the kind of the common reasons that things get rejected, even though it could really be anything. The timeline, so really like best case scenario, 8 weeks, but like it could be months, it could be up to a year. There could be a lot of back and forth and some extra cost. It's worth noting. Old houses are beautiful, but if they're listed and there's a conservation on them, just know that you're looking at a lot of extra time and cost. It just is what it is.
And specialist planning, process with architects and all that, you need someone like a conservation specialist or a conservation architect to submit your application for you, which is all extra cost and all extra time,
So make sure that the outcome was worth it for you. If you do that. And
talk to your neighbours or don't talk to your neighbours. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. You know your neighbours better than anyone. If you've lovely neighbours like Jen, maybe do. And if you had kind of some cranky ones like I used to have in the past, not now, they're sound now. Maybe don't.
Maybe don't draw, maybe leave it to the professionals. Maybe let the architect engage with that or whoever. If you don't want to get into a spat from the outset.
Exactly.
The one thing we haven't mentioned is retention. So obviously there are people out there who just go ahead and build and then hope for the best and reply for retention. And sometimes you know, you might be up against it. You might know that what you're doing is really small and unlikely to have any material impact on anyone else, in which case that's what it's there for. You know, it's something to think about. But it's happened in our neighbourhood where somebody just went ahead, ignored all the rules. So for example, I'm in a terraced house and I put on a dormer extension, but I had to keep that dormer raised roof a metre in from the sides from my neighbours. And that's just a rule and a regulation. And there's people in this neighbourhood who didn't do that. They just threw up a roof and added that metre on either side. And they've been asked, like the requirement is for them to totally dismantle it and take it down and start again, and they haven't done it.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what happens in that case. I presume it's just fine after fine after fine, and legal action. But yeah, be careful there. Just if you're going down that route where you are planning to just go for it, forget planning permission and go for retention, I would say be very sure that you know what the regulations are, because you could end up in a real bind there.
We did have to apply for retention for something minor in ours, in that we didn't know until we started ripping up kind of floorboards and to do work and to do pipe work, like the majority of the joists in the original part of this house were rotten, so we had to replace them. And to do that, we had to apply for retention as well for what we replaced it with. So that was something we had to do after the fact, but it was also something that didn't crop up or we wouldn't have known was an issue until we started the build. Like we knew parts of our floor downstairs were kind of spongy when you walked on them. The floorboards would sink a little bit, you know, like if you were jumping in one place, it might shake the room a little bit. So we knew the floor joists weren't great, but it wasn't until we lifted the floorboards that we could see just how rotted they were. So that was something that we had to put retention in for, but that's just one example. I don't know if I'd go building a two-story structure or something without planning, or changing all the windows to pink PVC, you know. But yeah, something minor like that is something that should kind of go through.
Okay, so that's planning. It's a minefield. We wish you all the best with it. And next up, we're going to be talking about your M&E plans, so your mechanical, electrical. This is your draining, your drainage, your plumbing, and our favourite topic, your lighting, because that needs to be planned out earlier than you think. So we will see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.